you just look at the stack of global source material you sent over for this deep dive, and it's all dated around December 2025, it is, I mean, it's immediately obvious that the world is under some intense systemic pressure. We're seeing major powers starting to fracture, economies are destabilizing, and core political institutions are really beginning to buckle. I mean, we're talking about an international landscape where established norms are just breaking down. You've got Canada and France recognizing Palestinian statehood despite U.S. opposition. Then there's the Trump-Medvedev nuclear threat standoff, which is creating this intense, very explicit global anxiety. And even the perceived stability of the European Union is shaken by this EU corruption scandal with arrests of huge figures like Mogherini. Okay, let's unpack this. While these sources cover really just sprawling global chaos, today we're focusing our deep dive on one specific high-stakes story. It's a tragedy that the editorial we're analyzing frames not as some local incident, but as a strategic political signal, a signal about the collapse of the rule of law.
Our mission today is to cut through all that noise, all those flashpoints, and really zero in on the core insights from an editorial called The Elimination of the Voice of Advocacy. This piece analyzes the sudden and very suspicious death of a defense lawyer, Khosro Alikourdi, and it argues that this incident is the calculated consequence of that global instability we're seeing, but hitting a very volatile political system with just massive ramifications for the pursuit of justice.
And here's where it gets really interesting. We're going to look at the lawyer's role, why someone operating within the legal framework became a strategic target. Then we'll analyze the bizarre institutional silence surrounding his death. And finally, we have to tackle the source's most provocative conclusion. What happens when that legal avenue for resistance is just destroyed, compelling the struggle to shift toward what they call the people's law? But before we jump into Alikourdi's case, let's quickly just confirm that global context, because it's essential to understanding the level of stress we were talking about. It feels like every mediating institution is under fire right now.
That's the key connection, whether it's geopolitical stability, economic fairness, or, judicial integrity. The headlines demonstrate these simultaneous failure points. And this global stress, it provides cover and justification for local strongmen to execute their most extreme survival strategies.
Exactly. And beyond the geopolitical flashpoints we mentioned, like the U.S. pressure on Venezuela intensifying, and then the follow-up question raised in the analysis, is it Iran's turn after Venezuela?
Yeah.
We also see economic systems failing their core function.
Oh, absolutely. The economic pressure is manifesting in these trade wars. You've got Trump tariffs on Canadian fertilizer causing friction, and the move to push a 100% duty on foreign films. And this translates directly to human cost. We see the Algoma steel layoffs crisis deepening as that trade war hits industrial workers.
And crucially, the sources note this pervasive crisis in labor.
Yeah.
The Canadian gig economy pay crisis, where workers are struggling with reports of pay as low as, $8 for 5 stops and giant grocery orders.
Right.
It just demonstrates that the economic structure is failing to protect the most vulnerable workers.
And if you zoom out, the thread connecting the Gen Z protests in Nepal over social media bans, the EU corruption scandal, and the trade war hitting steelworkers is that, traditional governing structures are losing their ability to manage complexity or maintain legitimacy. That really sets the stage for the incident we're focused on, where a local institution, the Bar Association, faces its own crisis of legitimacy.
Let's transition now to the core incident, the death of Khosro Alikourdi, a defense lawyer. This single event is being interpreted as a moment of severe political gravity, precisely because that global context is so fragile. So what's the fundamental conflict surrounding his tragic death?
Well, the conflict lies in two completely irreconcilable narratives presented in the sources. On one side, you have the official narrative. This is the one that's trying to dismiss the incident. The death of a healthy, active man is simply a heart attack.
Right, and on the other side?
On the other, the legal community narrative is, it's explicit. The independent jurists in the editorial, they view this as a clear-cut government killing.
A government killing?
Yes, and a systematic elimination, specifically targeting the one segment of society that was still using institutional means to challenge repression. What makes Alikourdi such a crucial figure is that he wasn't carrying a sign, he was carrying a briefcase. He was using the instrument of the law, the state's own language of legitimacy, to fight lawlessness. His name was closely tied to the highest-risk political cases, defending political prisoners, representing families of the 2022 uprising protesters, basically challenging state power right inside the courtroom.
So his success in the legal arena was actually proving that the system could still be used for justice, even in a corrupt environment. By succeeding, he was exposing the gap between the state's claim to judicial authority and its actual practice. So why eliminate him physically? Why not just disbar him or jail him? What signal does that send?
The analysis claims this choice stems from deep, what they call existential fear. The dictatorship views any successful legal defense as a direct attack on its remaining legitimacy, suggesting it may be in its final, most desperate stages. A disbarment is a legal fight. It acknowledges the court system. Physical elimination is a signal that the state is abandoning even the pretense of fighting within the rules.
So by assassinating the lawyer, they are physically removing the intermediary.
Exactly.
They're replacing confrontation in court with a pure strategy of intimidation designed to create complete passivity within that body of courageous lawyers.
Precisely. The goal is to make every other lawyer who even considers taking a political case realize they are no longer just risking a fine or, temporary jail time.
They're risking their lives.
They're risking their lives. The attempt is to render all sensitive cases ownerless and permanently block all legal avenues for seeking justice or reform. It's an act of judicial self-immolation by the regime.
That brings us to our next segment, the institutional response. When an event of this magnitude happens, the alleged targeted killing of a highly visible defense lawyer, the reaction, or, the lack of one, from official bodies is incredibly telling. And our source highlights a bitter division.
Absolutely. We see the clear lines of institutional capture here. On one side, we have the silence of official bodies, specifically the Bar Association. This is the institution legally obligated to defend the independence and safety of its members.
And yet, they failed to issue an explicit condemnation. They failed to launch an independent forensic investigation into the death.
That failure is a direct result of what the source calls intense pressure from state institutions. Imagine the fire department refusing to investigate a suspicious fire right next door to its station. That's the level of paralysis and compromise we are talking about. It fundamentally calls into question the Bar Association's professional identity and its independence. It shows that the political system has successfully neutralized the official legal structure meant to hold it accountable.
It shows that the state values its own survival over the sanctity of the legal profession. It turns the Bar Association from an autonomous body into essentially a rubber stamp for the regime's narrative.
And that institutional vacuum is immediately filled by the other side, the cry of independent lawyers. These jurists and civil activists, defying the very fear the regime tried to instill, explicitly called the death a government killing. They put themselves at immense personal risk by demanding accountability.
And they weren't satisfied with just, passive protest. They demanded actionable items that challenged the state's control over the evidence. They called for the publication of surveillance footage, which conveniently the security forces had seized, and demanded the formation of an independent investigative committee outside of state control.
Yes. They became the true voice of advocacy that the official Bar Association refused to be.
And this outcry didn't just stay local.
Not at all. The incident immediately drew intense international scrutiny, putting the regime on trial, really, on a global stage. Human rights organizations, specifically Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, issued strong, coordinated statements.
And they didn't treat this as some isolated crime.
No, not at all. They cited Alikourdi's case as definitive evidence that the regime continuously disregards its human rights obligations, linking it to an ongoing, systematic trend of eliminating political opponents and legal challenges. Furthermore, the incident is now a lightning rod in international forums. It serves as a serious test for the judicial independence of the state, raising pressure on mechanisms like the UN Special Rapporteurs on Human Rights. The sheer speed with which security agencies seize the evidence practically ensures that any domestic investigation will be viewed as a sham internationally. It undermines any claim the state makes to upholding the law or respecting due process.
So we have this action, the cold, strategic elimination of a key voice of legal reform, which the analysis describes as political self-sabotage by the government. The short-term goal was clearly intimidation, but what does the editorial argue this actually means for the long-term struggle against the regime?
Well, the core argument is that it is a catastrophic miscalculation. The analysis claims that eliminating one individual doesn't silence the movement. Instead, it plants the seeds of hundreds of other Alikourdis. The regime mistakenly assumes that removing the lawyer removes the problem.
But by attempting to destroy hope for change within the legal system, they are forcing the entire resistance movement outside of the predictable, controllable structures of courtrooms and legal arguments.
Exactly. The death is seen as the final, desperate act of a survival strategy based on pure intimidation. It eliminates what the editorial calls the lights of hope for peaceful, incremental reform. The state is telling its own people, in no uncertain terms, that the door to negotiation, to legal maneuvering, to internal structural change is permanently closed.
And this shifts the entire battlefield. If the regime has successfully achieved the complete closing of the courts and the elimination of the voice of advocacy, where does that resistance go?
This is where the analysis becomes most critical. It predicts the struggle shifts direction, and dramatically so. It moves out of the courtrooms and into the domain of the people's law. And this is not just some catchy phrase. It represents a fundamental change in the methodology of resistance.
So what does that shift entail practically? If it's not based on articles and clauses, how does the people's law actually manifest?
It manifests based on what the source describes as raw justice seeking, something rooted in the natural right to resist oppression. Think of it as advocacy stripped bare of all formality. It's immediate, it's focused on fundamental moral clarity rather than legal procedure. It's a shift from citing case law to citing human rights as they're understood by the population itself.
That sounds significantly harder for the regime to control. I mean, formal courts have structures, procedures, geographical limits. Raw justice seeking sounds decentralized, amorphous.
Precisely. When the state eliminates the formal legal challenge, it loses the ability to define the terms of the opposition. It trades a contained battle of legal arguments for an open-ended, popular, and far less predictable uprising based on deep moral outrage.
In the memory of those who were unjustly silenced.
Exactly.
The tragic irony here is just. It's so powerful. The regime attempted to silence the voice of advocacy by targeting Khosro Alikourdi. But that single act may instead ignite a struggle that is much harder to contain, much less to co-opt or defeat in a traditional sense.
And the memory of this lawyer is predicted to become a lasting symbol, a catalyst. For you, the listener, the critical takeaway is really understanding this mechanism, how political systems, especially those facing what they see as an end phase, make these tactical mistakes. They eliminate the intermediaries of reform, the lawyers, the moderate opposition, only to catalyze a far more fundamental, less controllable opposition movement based on raw popular resistance.
That's a crucial insight into political dynamics. By systematically closing the door on any path for internal legal reform, the system risks opening the door to something much larger, much more volatile, and ultimately existential for the state itself.
And this raises an important question for you to mull over. If the legal framework and its institutions, the courts, the bar associations, are systematically compromised and removed as mediating structures, what new form of legitimacy must a resistance movement establish to sustain its long-term fight against oppression? And how does that raw justice-seeking translate into a durable, effective political strategy?